Coming up, after North Korea's most recent firing of artillery shellings into buffer zones, China voices hope of preventing things from getting worse, while the U.S. also responds saying it's concerned by the North's most recent actions. Russian President Vladimir Putin orders martial law in 4 Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine, signaling his growing frustration over Ukrainian advances into territory Russia illegally annexed last month. Plus, Kakao's co-CEO steps down following the system failure over the last weekend. He apologizes for the inconvenience and says the company will look into ways to compensate businesses and individuals who have lost opportunities to make money. Good morning and welcome to New Day at Arirang. We begin yet again with provocations from North Korea as North Korea fired more artillery rounds into the sea despite strong warnings and violating the 2018 military agreement again on Wednesday afternoon. This was only hours after South Korea warned against such actions after the North had carried out similar activity early Wednesday morning. Peun-ji starts us off.
From 12:30 on Wednesday afternoon, North Korea fired around 100 artillery rounds toward the West Sea. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said it detected them being fired from North Korea's Yeonan County. The JCS explained Wednesday morning that although none of the shells landed in South Korea's territorial waters, they did land in maritime buffer zones, north of the Northern Limit Line. The buffer zones are boundaries that have been set up to ease military tension along the two Koreas' border areas through an inter-Korean military agreement signed on September 19, 2018. The JCS added that in response to the latest firing, it sent warning messages to the North numerous times for violating the military agreement. It also said it's monitoring the situation through close cooperation with the U.S. and is strengthening readiness. This comes less than a day after the regime fired 250 rounds late Tuesday night, which was also a violation of the military agreement as the shells landed in maritime buffer zones near the border. Pyongyang fired around 100 into the West Sea from around 10 p.m. on Tuesday, and another 150 rounds were fired into the East Sea an hour later. Earlier in the day, South Korea's JCS has sent a warning, urging the regime to immediately halt such provocations.
Provocations like this from North Korea are not only a clear violation of the September 19th military agreement, but they also undermine the peace and stability of the Korean Peninsula, as well as the international community.
For the past few weeks, North Korea has engaged in multiple provocations. Last Friday, it fired a total of 560 artillery rounds toward the maritime buffer zones. A day before that, 10 or so North Korean warplanes flew near the inter-Korean border, crossing the so-called tactical action line, something that's not happened for the past 5 years. Peun-ji, Arirang News.
The United States is still open to dialogue with North Korea despite the regime firing about 100 more artillery shells towards the maritime buffer zone on Wednesday. Vedant Patel, deputy spokesperson of the U.S. State Department, said the North's provocations over the week are creating a dire situation, especially for Washington's allies like South Korea and Japan. When asked by reporters whether the U.S. viewed the latest shell firings as a way for Pyongyang to get Washington's attention, Patel said the State Department wouldn't make assumptions, but the U.S. is always open to dialogue as the North's complete denuclearization is its #1 priority. Since last week, North Korea has been firing shells off its west and east coast into the maritime buffer zones the two Koreas created in 2018 as part of their agreement to reduce tensions. On North Korea's provocations, China voiced hopes of preventing the situation from worsening into tit-for-tat shows of military might. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wonbin made the remarks during a briefing on Wednesday when asked to comment on the regime's recent activities. He said Beijing hopes the two Koreas stick to finding a political solution, focusing on safeguarding peace and stability on the peninsula. The top diplomat also stressed the importance of resolving things in a balanced way through dialogue and negotiation. Seoul and Washington carried out a joint river crossing operation drill, part of a larger annual military exercise in South Korea. The field training involved 1,000 troops from both sides, as well as K2 tanks and Apache choppers. Min Soo-kyun fills us in.
As part of the annual Hoguk defense drills aimed at enhancing combat readiness and joint force capabilities to counter North Korea's nuclear and missile threats, The South Korean Army on Wednesday carried out a river crossing training exercise with U.S. forces. About 1,000 South Korean and U.S. troops took part in the roughly 6-hour drills, which involved 50 combat vehicles, including K2 tanks. Apache and Cobra attack helicopters, as well as KF-16 fighters, were also used in the warlike drills. Wednesday's exercise was conducted under a virtual battlefield situation in where South Korean American troops practiced building floating bridges for tanks, armored vehicles, and foot soldiers to cross rivers.
So the purpose of today's training was to conduct a large-scale wet gap crossing operation combined with both U.S. and ROK forces to validate our capabilities. So far, it's been extremely successful and demonstrated the strength of the U.S.-ROK alliance.
The 12-day Hoguk exercise that began this Monday will run until October 28th. The field training comes at a time when North Korea has carried out several missile tests while firing hundreds of artillery shells into waters off its east and west coasts. Pyongyang has angrily responded to the combined military exercises between South Korea and the U.S., calling them an invasion rehearsal. Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
Poland agreed to buy more weapons from South Korea. In the latest arms deal, the country signed a deal to buy 288 artillery rocket launchers on top of its previous purchases of tanks and howitzers. The deal is estimated to be worth about $5 billion. It comes as part of Poland's efforts to bolster defense following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The weapons are made by Hanwha Defense. If the deal goes through, shipping is expected to begin next year. Now, over in Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin has decided to tighten his grip on Ukraine and Russia by declaring martial law in the 4 regions of Ukraine that Kremlin claims to have annexed. Kim Yo-sun has more on the latest developments.
Defying international law, Russian President Vladimir Putin has signed a law introducing martial law in 4 Ukrainian regions Moscow claimed to have annexed last month. The regions are Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk.
Now we need to formalize this within the framework of Russian legislation. Therefore, I have signed a decree introducing martial law into these 4 entities of the Russian Federation.
He has also signed a separate order imposing restrictions on movement in and out of 8 Russian regions located near Ukraine. Such moves mark the latest escalation by the Russian leader to counter a series of major defeats at the hands of Ukrainian forces since the beginning of last month. Kyiv's foreign ministry has condemned the decree as a, quote, new state of terror aimed at suppressing the resistance of the residents who live in those regions. In a separate development, Russian authorities on Tuesday ordered the evacuation of 50,000 civilians from the southern Ukrainian town of Kherson, which is occupied by the Russians. The city has been the focal point of Ukraine's highly successful counteroffensive recently. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
U.S. President Joe Biden has announced that Washington will release 15 million barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in December in a bid to bring fuel prices down ahead of the midterm elections. He explained that the measure is part of a record 180-barrel release that began in May. Biden further added that the country is ready to tap into the reserves once again early next year. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which was established after the oil crisis of the 1970s as a national energy safety net, is currently at its lowest level since 1984. The Biden administration on Wednesday announced it would hand out $2.8 billion of grants to U.S. manufacturing and processing companies to boost the domestic production of electric vehicle batteries. Biden said this was to reduce Washington's dependency on China for key materials needed to make batteries. The 20 subsidized companies extract and process battery materials like lithium and graphite. The U.S. hopes to secure enough lithium to supply more than 2 million electric vehicles each year. By 2030, the U.S. is aiming for 50% of all new vehicles sold to be electric or hybrid electric models. South Korea was thrown into chaos over the weekend after a fire caused the country's biggest mobile messenger app, Kakao, and top portal website go offline. Most services are up and running again, but Kakao's co-CEO resigned over the issue. Ji-young brings the updates.
Kakao's nationwide shutdown paralyzed the whole country as it lasted for more than 30 hours before most services were up and running again. Representatives of Kakao made a public apology on Wednesday, and one of the co-CEOs, Nam Gung-hoon, said that he'll take responsibility and step down.
When we think of our users and partners who experienced inconveniences communicating, taxi drivers who could not take calls, or business owners who couldn't use the marketing channel, we will take this opportunity to completely inspect and reform the whole Kakao system.
The nationwide digital shutdown disrupted nearly every sector of the country, from banking to catching a cab. Small business owners were hit especially hard by the blackout, as many of them rely heavily on Kakao services to reach customers. An owner of a local cake shop says he stayed up all night at his shop on Saturday waiting for the service to resume normally.
We receive orders only through KakaoTalk, so it is directly connected to our sales. During the blackout, we couldn't do any work. Rather than compensation, I would appreciate it if Kakao can prevent anything like this from happening in the future.
Taxi companies relying on the taxi hailing app Kakao T also suffered huge losses over the weekend as drivers struggled to find customers during the blackout. They blame Kakao's monopolistic dominance of the market.
Normally, on average, 18 drivers work each day, but only 4 came to work today. Drivers were not able to work properly for 3 days, so our earnings were down by around 80%. There are about 70,000 taxis operating in Seoul, and 100% of them are Kakao T users.
Kakao has set up an emergency committee to deal with the situation and come up with compensation plans. The CEO says they have opened up a channel where people can report their losses.
Based on the reports, we will discuss who to compensate and how much to pay them. We will consider compensating not only those who've been using our paid services, but also our users and partners who've suffered losses due to the blackout.
He added that Kakao will swiftly pay compensation before clarifying responsibility with SKCNC, which runs the data center where the fire broke out. Ji-young, Arirang News.
While President Yoon Suk-yeol has vowed to improve bilateral ties with Japan, historical issues continue to be an obstacle. At a time when the two countries are seeking ways to deter North Korea's threats and hostilities in the region, could the world see the two countries come to an agreement on the sensitive historical issue of compensating victims of forced labor during World War II? While the South Korean government has been openly engaging with victims of forced labor, how is Japan approaching this situation? We have Jeff Kingston, professor of Asia Studies at Temple University, Japan, this morning. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
Now, Moon and Abe were unable to resolve this issue. What are the chances that Yoon and Kishida can overcome this impasse?
Yeah, Moon and Abe were at odds from the beginning, had a very chilly relationship. The deal that was negotiated with Park Geun-hye about the comfort woman basically was dead on arrival. Moon asked Abe to make a public apology. He refused. And so it came across as a half-hearted, carefully calibrated gesture aimed at preserving Japan's legal position. So Kishida is very much aware of how that deal went south very quickly. And so as foreign minister, he was involved. So I think he's quite wary. And, because Yoon is very unpopular, he looks almost already like a lame duck president. So does it make sense to strike a deal with him? And Kishida is also extremely weak. He has really plunged in the polls, mostly due to the Unification Church scandal that is roiling Japanese politics. So it looks like a very difficult time to reach an agreement.
Right, and we know that South Korean government has made efforts to be in touch with the victims that the court ruled for. How does Japan want to approach this issue at this point? It's not a matter of factual whether there was a wartime forced labor or not. So what are the barriers to reaching an agreement?
I think there are huge political barriers. I think Kishida sees no particular upside politically for him and a big downside. Revisionists rule the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, and they are interested in rehabilitating Japan's wartime and colonial history. They, I don't think, are that interested in concluding a deal. Now, the thing is, there is money available. A foundation was set up in 2014. POSCO has donated plenty of money to compensate the 300-odd victims. So money isn't the issue. The proposal's on the table. It's really waiting Japan to respond. And I think that it's probably unlikely that Kishida is going to seize the moment. The chances are there, but because he's so politically weak and the Unification Church is linked to South Korea, I don't think he can make enough concessions for Yoon, and I also think that Yoon cannot make enough concessions for Kishida. So I think the political weakness on both sides creates a lot of headwinds for a deal. And some people are still optimistic. Something might be negotiated by the end of the year. Let's see, but I'm not holding my breath.
Right, and the window to settle this issue is getting smaller and smaller. One of the victims, Kim Ok-sun, died a couple of days ago, age 93. There aren't many of the victims left at this point to see Japan's compensation. Is Japan trying to just drag this issue out for as long as it can?
Well, you know, I think that really Kishida is in a position where it's difficult for him to move forward on this. And the tragic result is many of the victims will die before any deal is reached. I don't think maybe they're dragging their feet waiting for them all to die, but I think that they don't really see an upside. And the thing is, in the deal, you know, that they could actually resolve the issue, it would require money, which is available, and Japan would have to offer some expression of apology or sincere contrition. And that, I think, is a stumbling block. So I think that unless Japan makes a grand gesture, this issue won't be resolved. And I just don't think Kishida is likely to do so.
Right. I mean, it's a complicated issue. And thank you for putting in a basic term for everyone to understand. And I hope you have a great morning. Thank you
very much. You too.
For a look at the news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Good morning.
Good morning, Do-yeon.
Let's start in the UK, where a second senior minister has left their post in the space of a week.
Well, indeed. Amid a very tumultuous time in UK politics, the country's Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, left her position on Wednesday. Now, Braverman said she resigned after breaking technical rules by using her personal email address to send official documents to colleagues in Parliament. Her resignation letter also contained harsh criticisms of the leadership shown by the UK's Prime Minister Liz Truss. The Home Secretary's resignation comes just days after Truss fired her Chancellor for a deeply unpopular fiscal policy proposal. Now, adding to the crisis facing the Truss government was a chaotic House of Commons vote on fracking that was widely seen as a confidence vote in the Prime Minister. 40 Conservative MPs abstained, and there were claims that other MPs were bullied into voting. At least 8 people have been killed and 18 others injured following 2 explosions at Myanmar's largest prison. The blasts occurred at the insane prison facility in the former capital of Yangon on Wednesday morning, local time. The explosions were triggered when 2 packaged bombs detonated inside the building's mailroom. A third unexploded bomb was found later by authorities. 3 prison guards and 5 visitors were among those killed. Now, following the explosions, guards in the watchtowers reportedly opened fire. Eyewitnesses say this led to a number of injuries. No one has yet claimed responsibility for the incident. Insane Prison is known for its harsh conditions. It houses around 10,000 inmates, mostly political prisoners. Now, the people of Ukraine were declared the recipients of an EU Freedom Prize on Wednesday for their fight against Russia's invasion. Called the Sakharov Prize, the award is handed out by the European Parliament every year to those who defend freedom of thought and human rights. The award comes with around $49,000 in prize money, which will be handed out to Ukrainian representatives. The prize has been awarded every year since 1988 and is named after the late Soviet dissident Andrei Sakharov. Notable past winners include late South African President Nelson Mandela and Pakistani education activist Malala Yousafzai. And finally, 2 pandas touched down in Qatar on Wednesday. They have been gifted by China to the desert country in the lead-up to the 2022 World Cup. The pandas will live in Qatar for 15 years in a specially built enclosure designed to recreate their natural habitat. 800 kilograms of bamboo will be flown in each week to feed the pandas. Visitors will be able to see them after the pandas complete a 21-day quarantine. The pair have been given Arabic names, with the 4-year-old male named Suhail and the 3-year-old female named Turaya. Pandas are considered unofficial Chinese mascots, with only 1,800 still living in the wild and 500 more in enclosures.
Good morning. It's another day with a much colder start, but after days of somewhat early winter-like temperatures, we can expect afternoon highs to return to near seasonal norms this afternoon. So that means we'll see much wider temperature differences, and inland areas could be seeing temperature gaps of more than 20 degrees Celsius, including Ponghwa and Jiangsu. So it must feel like 2 seasons in one day there. Those in central regions, Jeollabuk-do and Gyeongsang-puk-do provinces will need to drive with extra care due to dense fog this morning. And afternoon highs will be 2 to 4 degrees Celsius higher than yesterday in most parts of the country this afternoon. Sunny skies will be featured nationwide all day long, and air quality will remain decent, but Incheon, Chungcheong, Namdo province could see dust levels rising at night and could remain dusty through the weekend, unfortunately. Mostly dry and calm conditions are forecast for the next few days, with more up and down temperatures across much of Korea. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
That wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Friday's edition at the same time. Please stay with Arirang News, though, for more updates throughout the day. Have a lovely day or evening wherever you are, and take care.